maybe there are 200 people with blue ticks and whatever who are calling you Godi media or whatever it is that they say, right? But that's just them. They are not India. They are just a very, very, very small part of India, as I am, as you are. In my mind, they should not be getting undue attention or influence.
Okay.
One of the most challenging interviews that I did was with Perez Musharraf. He'd been the general, he'd been the president of Pakistan. So you don't want to be caught out on facts. You want to be prepared with everything. If he says this should be my counter. If he says this, then this is what I should come back to him with. To his credit, he did not ask for questions. You're more likely to be killed by a teenager with a gun in the US today than in Afghanistan. That says a lot about what they're turning into.
She's one of the most respected journalists out there because of her opinions, because of her research, because of her delivery, and because of her well-rounded approach to journalism. I just represent the youth, and this was a youth and new age media meets old age media episode of the Ranveer Show. Not going to speak too much about Palki Sharma because many of you viewers already know her. For those of you who don't, I promise you, I'm introducing you to a library of knowledge through introducing you to Palki Sharma. She's the first of many journalists that we're going to bring on the Ranveer Show. So enjoy this episode. Make sure you follow us on Spotify. We're Spotify exclusive. Every episode's available on Spotify 48 hours before it's available anywhere else in the world. My meditation app, Level, is now live on the App Store and the Play Store. Check that out as well. But for now, this is Palki Sharma on the Ranveer Show. Palki Sharma Upadhyay, welcome to the Ranveer Show. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
You're the first person from the world of journalism that we've had on the show ever. And I was actually waiting for you to be on the show to begin this whole journalism aspect of TRS. So firstly, thank you. Secondly, welcome.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me here.
Why do you think you have this kind of cult following now?
Cult following?
You do have a cult following.
Really?
Yeah.
That's news to me. I cannot get my own children to watch my news. So
really?
When I influence them and when I impress them enough, then I'll. But thank you for saying it, and thank you for everyone who's watching. I really appreciate it.
You know, a lot of that cult following comes from outside of this country, which is insane. For content creators sitting in this country, this is the dream, especially if you're making English content. And I feel as we're moving forward in time, this line between the world of journalism and content creation is kind of getting blurred. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Or if you think differently.
No, you have a point. But I think as journalists, we tend to think of ourselves as I know, how should I put it? That we have more responsibility, I think.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
And we are scrutinized more because we are supposed to be serving a purpose. We are called the fourth pillar. While Bollywood has done so much more, or entertainment industry has done so much more, they're not called the fourth pillar of democracy. So in a sense, there's that weight of narrative creation. But you're right that we are all, at the end of the day, I've always said we are all storytellers. We are all telling something to the audience. And the audience has increasingly stopped distinguishing between news and reels and shorts and everything else. For them, what is coming on their phone, they like a video, they don't like a video. That's pretty much it.
Have you seen The Social Dilemma? It's a documentary about algorithms on Netflix and how algorithms control the whole world now and opinions. And it's the reason behind why the whole world in silos is completely polarized. So for example, in the American silo, everyone's on their right wing or their left wing, and it's usually on two extreme ends. But the same can be said for everywhere in the world. Even India, right now, we call it right wing or left wing, but it's actually pro-Modi, anti-Modi. And this is what came up on yesterday's show with Rajiv Malhotra. Now, the thing is, in this primarily extreme right and extreme left atmosphere, if you're a centrist, if you're apolitical, if you have a slightly right-leaning perspective or a slightly left-leaning perspective, and on top of that, if you're famous and you're an opinion maker, thought leader, you're categorized as one of the two. Okay, for example, on this show, we've done a lot of videos on Hinduism. Why? Because it's a topic of interest for me since I was a kid. I'm automatically categorized on the right, and anything I say politically is always met with some criticism from the left. If I make any say now again, because we're doing interreligious studies on the podcast, if we do an episode on Islam or Christianity, then I'm suddenly categorized as an extreme left, and I get criticized by like the extreme right. In truth, I feel like I'm a centrist, and it's ethical for a media person to be a centrist and just observe what's happening and relay information. Do you also get some sort of criticism like that? Like, I know your brand image is associated with being India first, uh, but there will be a lot of people who actually categorize you as pro Modi and then put you on an extreme right just because you're India first. Like, if you don't say that, oh, the country is going to the dogs, then you're a pro Modi and a right wing person. So I know you think of this. What do you think of it, Palki Sharma Upadhyay?
Well, I have so much to say about this. I don't know where to start, but yes, people do categorize you. People do label you. We are in a world where people are always boxed into these different segments, whether or not they think they belong there. And the people who do it are entitled to their opinion. That's fine. Initially, it used to bother me. And I thought that I have to clear the air and say that, okay, I may agree with X person's policy on such and such thing, but that does not mean I'm a cheerleader for that person or that government or whatever. But over the years, I've realized that, and there are two parts to this. One, most of this opinion flows from Twitter. How big is Twitter in India? We are a country of 1.4 billion people, 140 crores. So there's just a handful of people who get disproportionate representation in the opinion-making space and think that what they are saying is what the country is thinking.
You'll have to break down that. That's too high level of thought. Handful of people.
So, okay. So if maybe there are 200 people with blue ticks and whatever who are calling you Godi media or whatever it is that they say, right? Okay. But that's just them. I also look at the audience that is watching me. I also look at the trend in which this country is voting and how they are not India. They're just a very, very, very small part of India, as I am, as you are. So they should not be, or in my mind, they should not be getting undue attention or influence. That is one. In my case, a lot of these people are also, for want of a better expression, failed TV journalists.
Really?
If you're so good, then do it yourself. Instead of sitting outside and telling me how to do my job well.
That's true. A lot of the intense tools are failed content creators. So I'm sorry, I'm like continuously drawing parallels.
No. So it's a case of grapes being sour, and how much time and effort and mental space are you going to give to such people and such voices? That is not to say that you don't take criticism seriously, but you see what kind of criticism there is. You have to surround yourself with people who can constructively criticize you. Let me say this about it. I think journalists, like all individuals, have opinion. To say that I don't have an opinion on something or I'm not biased towards something would be a lie. And to say that only, the way in which the word has come to be understood, only unbiased journalism is credible journalism, is not exactly right. The first newspaper in India was called Hickey's Bengal Gazette. And it was an anti-British newspaper. So was it biased? Because it only did stories against imperialists. As journalists, we are supposed to take a stand against big corporations that are exploiting workers. Are we biased? Yes, we are biased towards workers, towards their rights. So journalists have always taken a stand. The mere decision to say that this is a headline and this is not a headline is an expression of your bias. According to me, this is important and this is what you should know. But this is something that you may not want to know, or I don't think it's important enough. In every decision that we take, we in some way let our bias speak. And I remember reading something very interesting, and tell me if it's too complicated.
No, go for it.
So back in the day, the American media and all other media started practicing what was called both sidism. You give both sides of the story. Because advertisers wanted a large section of the society to consume the content, to see their ads, and then come and buy their products. So they didn't want to upset anyone, any side. The Americans progressed fairly fast, and the media started wearing their ideology on their sleeve, as it were, and started saying that this is pro-Republican, this is pro-Democrat. It became very clear. In India, we never showed it. That does not mean that there weren't any biases or leanings, but we pretended that we are following both sidism, giving both sides of the story. That does not work. You lay the facts out on the table, and I think it's a more honest approach when you say, this is what happened, but this is what I feel about it. This is where I'm coming from. So I think I'm having a very honest conversation with my audience by telling them that this is my opinion on such and such subject. And I think you're smart enough to form your own. I will not shove it down your throat. That is my understanding of how fair journalism should be done. That is not to say that you suppress the facts of the other side, but you give your opinion.
I was once in a room where my co-founder Viraj was having a conversation with another content creator who was saying, oh, journalists are dead, journalists are dying, things like that. And Viraj said, okay, if journalists are dying, why is it that only journalists can ask people hard-hitting questions in interviews? Like a content creator would never do that. Because a content creator honestly wants to maintain the relationships with billionaires and with politicians if they're ever on the show. But journalists will ask the extremely hard-hitting questions, which I feel is your responsibility to society. And it's possibly one of the more traditional occupations. And there's a very important place in society for journalism.
You think journalists don't have relationships?
I would like to know that.
They do. Okay. We do. How do you think you get an interview? In my experience, every time I have written to a head of state or a leader in India or outside, in 99% of the cases, they ask for questions. In some cases, they also want to have a say in the edit.
Really?
Yes.
Okay. Do you allow them?
One of my colleagues went, and I will not name the country, but when he landed there, he was told that you can keep your camera aside. We have a camera team. We will record the interview, and we will send you a tape after it has been post-produced. The choice is between taking that interview or not taking that interview. Sometimes you stand your ground. This one time I was given a stool, and the person I was interviewing had basically a huge throne. And I was told this is a president, and I was told that the president will not sit in a chair that's similar to yours. And I said, I'm going, because I'm not his subject. It's a very small thing, but for a viewer, it's really funny, and it's not okay. So sometimes you take a stand and you say, no, I'm not going to do this. And then sometimes you just think that, okay, maybe if I let them strike off this question, I can ask something else that is tougher. Most mature leaders will take tough questions in their stride. Last week, I had a very interesting conversation with the former US Defense Secretary. It was a good conversation, and then he went on and on about how America is fostering and, working on democracy and wants it to be spread across the world and so on and so forth. At which point I asked him that if you're so keen on democracy, why do you have undemocratic allies in West Asia? And you kept on working with China as long as it worked out for you. And then when it did not, you say China is a threat. So it's basically a bogey that you use, a convenient argument. He did not have an answer, but that does not mean once we were off the stage, he started fighting with me. No, he did not. Right? So mature leaders would take questions and then still have a conversation with you after that. So we do have relationships. Relationships lead to interviews. Relationship leads to stories a lot of times. The challenge is to to maintain that 6 degrees of separation. And explain that while we can have a civil conversation and be in touch, I'm doing my job and you're doing your job. And my job says that I should be able to ask you the questions I think I want to ask you.
Okay.
And you can answer them the way you want to.
Okay. What's been the most tense interview situation you've been in? Are you going to take names?
Yeah.
Okay.
One of the most challenging interviews that I did was with Perez Musharraf.
Okay.
It was in his house in Dubai. And I have never prepared for an interview like I did then, because I knew that he was very tough, and it was one of my first bigger interviews.
He's very tough, as in like tough guy to speak to.
See, he'd been the general, he'd been the president of Pakistan. All of my understanding of the subject is from what I've read and what I've covered as a journalist. Whereas his understanding of it is as someone who's been in the thick of things. So you don't want to be caught out on facts. You want to be prepared with everything. If he says this should be my counter. If he says this, then this is what I should come back to him with. To his credit, he did not ask for questions. I went with 55 questions. And he gave me the time. And we did that interview. I think it was a good interview, but I was extremely tense and I did not want to get anything wrong there. So also with the India-Pakistan equation, and there's a lot of judgment that comes flying at you. Your body language, your expression, you're sitting in his house. You can't be like going with a gun at his head, right? You have to smile once in a while. So for a viewer, it's very hard to, I think, relate to the dynamics that are at play when an interview is being done.
Yeah.
So you have to think of a lot of things.
Okay.
And the next question when someone is talking.
How was it speaking to him? But
it was good.
But why did you say it's tense? Like the actual conversation was tense?
No, the actual conversation was not. I think in the run-up to the conversation, I just wanted to make sure. And I tend to, I was telling you earlier, I tend to prepare. I don't like going into anything unprepared. And I like to have a pen. I like to have numbers. I like to have data. I want to have a comeback if somebody is saying something which I don't agree with. And I want to have a credible, solid comeback, not like I don't agree with you.
Okay. When you interview someone over an hour or so, you get to know about the person's energy, who it is as a human being. And I think that's a trip of podcasts.
Yeah.
What was Perez Musharraf's human side like? What did you learn about him in that interaction? Because there's a bunch of questions that reveal data. But the thing is, what audiences don't pick up on in interviews is you also get to know subliminal things about the person.
Yeah. I think he was a man who was really full of himself. Like, incredible. This man, when I met him, was living in exile. He lost his power. He had cases against him. If he went back to Pakistan, then he would probably be hung out to dry. And yet he told me, I'm going to go back and I will probably contest an election. And no, people in Pakistan love me. And I mean, really, what are you smoking? Even if you read his book, he says, I was the best student in school. I was the best in college. I came out with flying colors. Okay, people can be narcissistic, but who talks about himself like that? He really believed that he came with an ulterior sort of mission and he was going to change the fate of Pakistan. As it happened, he died in exile. But he was really, he was civil, he was courteous, he was a good host. But
is this the case with a lot of world leaders? That they're stuck in a bit of a bubble? I don't blame them because everything around them is catered towards them, their day, their priorities, their opinions, and they've earned it in life. And then the bubble gets formed.
So I've met some very, very humble leaders as well, who are not, who have self-deprecating humor, who some of them are very well read. Like I went and once interviewed a president in Armenia who told me so much about Gandhi he'd read. And he was a very erudite, well-spoken, well-read person. So sometimes they do surprise you because your research does not tell you all of that, or maybe I did not do it well enough. But But you do meet people who pleasantly surprise you, who are not as who not in a la la land, who don't think that the world revolves around them.
Okay. I began my career. A mentor of mine told me that the easiest way to create change in society is to influence the influencers. But you need people to influence the influencers. And I think that's what you're doing right now. Which is why I find it really cool that you put in really sharp things in your content. I don't call it content, in your stories. See, I'm like just being very careful here. But for example, you didn't call COVID-19 ever. You called it the Wuhan virus. Yeah, we caught you there. Okay, why? Firstly, one layer deep why, in terms of why do you choose to do these things? And then one layer above that is what's up in China according to you? Like, what's going to happen? This is the whole geopolitical part of the podcast.
Okay, I'll start with the last question. What's going to happen? If they don't get rid of that president of theirs, they are in trouble.
Okay.
He's just started his third term. Again, like we discussed, there are some leaders who believe that they come with a higher purpose and they sort of become delusional. And he's just announced his new team, and the 7 top men in the Chinese government now have been handpicked by Xi Jinping, and their only claim to fame is that they're loyal to him, right? Their positions are tied to their loyalty to the president. And that's a very dangerous position to be in. For long, he's been called the chairman of everything. He controls every important body, political, military, or economic. And he's irrational, erratic, unpredictable. China's story is basically the story of its economy rising and then the political aspirations following. So Mao Zedong had his own ideas about what would work and what wouldn't, and some of them were crazy. And we saw the Cultural Revolution and the Long March and the things that he made people do. And then during Deng Xiaoping's era, they sort of got their act together. And this is a leader who told the Chinese to hide their strength and bide their time. That's the slogan he gave them. Just put your heads down and do your work. And there were some rules put in place on how long a president could serve and what sort of committees would be there. China calls itself a democracy, but has largely been an authoritarian state with very limited democracy, if at all. There isn't any now. But they made a lot of progress. And the leadership thought that if you give a certain standard of living and economic progress, then people will not ask for political freedoms. That is the bargain. It worked till it worked. And then you had someone like Xi Jinping who came on the scene and who said, first of all, I will get rid of the military leaders. You know, that purge that he started in the name of fighting corruption has been on, and tens of thousands of leaders, military officials, government officials have been purged. He has slowly but surely consolidated power to a point where no one can question what he's doing. So for months, there's going to be zero COVID and all of Shanghai is going to be locked down. And there is no question that is being asked on why this is being done. How does it serve our purpose? Suddenly, there's no zero COVID. Let's open everything. And people are dying left, right, and center. Your economy is in a very bad shape. Your geopolitical relationships are all suffering. You truly think you're at the center of the world. You know, they had this idea of being called the Middle Kingdom. We are the ones that link earth with heaven. He's taken it very seriously. But if China does not export to the world, then it's the end of the China story. And if countries consciously and in very large numbers stop buying from China and truly diversify their supplies, then how are they going to redeem themselves? So they are in a very, very precarious situation right now.
And you anticipate that people are not going to continue?
Beyond a point, why will they? Why will they? Do you know China spends more on internal security than on the military outside? Their leaders are very scared about protests at home.
Have you been to China?
Yes.
And what's the vibe?
And I went to Wuhan. When Prime Minister Modi went a few years back, this was a summit between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi. And this also ties into the next question that you asked on why the Wuhan virus, because I've seen that city firsthand. It's a beautiful city. And I saw the people, they were very friendly. I saw the police that was less friendly. They chased us away, not letting us do a lot of things. You needed permits for everything. We faced the struggles that we faced in countries like China while reporting there.
Countries like China being?
There are some countries where media freedoms are restricted. You need a lot of paperwork to do anything, right? So, and then in not even 2020, actually 2019 December, somebody in my team came and said, there's some disease, that's spreading in China and such thing has happened. And we picked the story one day. Then 2 days later, he came again and said, this is happening. So we started reading. And it did not add up. I or my team, we do not have an anti-China agenda. We just stumbled upon a story and we investigated and went deeper and deeper. And we found that there's a lot of problem here that the world is not talking about. And because I had seen that city, and to see images of Wuhan locked up and people standing in queues in hazmat suits, students not getting what they wanted, was a bit jarring for me. Also, the year 2020 on a personal front was a very difficult one for me. And then the year that followed, we've all, I'm sure, seen very bad days during the pandemic. We've seen people in our family end up in hospital. Both my children were down with COVID for no fault of theirs. What did they do? We've lost relatives, friends. And how do you get away with this? It wasn't personal, but now it is.
You're basically calling it a bioweapon.
I don't know if it's a bioweapon. All I'm saying is that the virus spread. And the Chinese government did not do enough to warn the world. And if they have nothing to hide, then why don't they let an investigation happen? Why have you destroyed data samples? Why have you not given access to that laboratory? What are you hiding if you have nothing to hide? So the least that we can... it can be an accident, it can be a bioweapon, it can be a lab-created virus. Frankly, I don't have an answer because I don't have proof. But the least I deserve, and you deserve, and everyone else in this room deserves, is to know why we went through that horror for 2 years. How can we let someone get away with this and call him to meetings and shake hands with him and say everything is okay? It's not okay with me.
Okay. I don't know about that, but I definitely think some powerful people get pissed off with you. Like, honestly, I'm being very raw here. But have they ever gotten in touch saying, hey, we're pissed off with you? Why'd you say
No,
that?
they do complain. Obviously, there are complaints. But I think if no one's upset and offended, then you're only doing PR.
What happens of those complaints?
If they have merit, then we course correct. Most of the times they don't. So we let it be. I did something on say, for instance, Malaysian palm oil and how palm oil is in everything that we are eating. The food that we eat from outside, and it really impacts your health and so on and so forth.
And orangutans.
That too.
Go on.
No. So, no, but we got these long letters from the Palm Oil Association. Abhi hum kya kare? Palm oil is harmful for health. You may not like our story, but it's a story. So, that's a small example, but I'm just saying that a lot of times people register a complaint for the sake of it. And okay, we've seen it. And we are happy to publish your version, but we stand by our story.
Okay. Coming back to China, let's close that loop.
Okay.
We have a separate channel called TRS Clips. So this is the long form podcast which goes up on this channel, which is Beerbiceps. And then we have a separate channel where there are only highlights for audiences that don't want to consume an entire show. And by doing this, I've both marketed that channel and two, I'm closing this loop.
You're so smart.
Let's close this China loop. What do you think is going to happen in the 20s? And probably when the 30s begin?
I think there's a real risk of war with Taiwan. I think that's topmost on their agenda. They really want to. They've made it about their prestige, and they want to do with Taiwan what they did with Hong Kong. I've been to Hong Kong too. I've seen the beautiful city that it was, and now what it has become. So I don't see the expansionism abating. I think that it's only this whole, while their diplomacy is changing tactics. They used to be called the wolf warriors. They would go everywhere, say all sorts of things to people. Now they're toning it down, taking a softer approach, even projecting themselves as victims and saying, we are not the wolves. We are dancing with the wolves, which is America and the rest. But I think there is this attempt to power grab and grab land is very much there. The worrying part is what is happening on the border with India. That situation is far from resolved. We've had multiple rounds of talks. Despite everything, China remains our biggest trading partner. And that's not a good place to be in. Diversification and building alternatives cannot happen overnight. It'll take time. So we have to bide our time, keep up our defenses, and become self-reliant, or Atmanirbhar, as they say in the government. I don't see the Chinese political thinking shifting significantly.
Atmanirbhar Bharat is actually a strong geopolitical move.
It is.
It's an out-and-out geopolitical move, but to be able to be digested by the masses, you have to brand it in a certain way. It's effectively what it is. We need to stop relying on China because...
But we can't stop relying on China, not yet.
Over the next decade.
At the height of this whole Galwan thing, I remember, and this was also during the lockdowns and the intermittent whatever periods, and I was at a neighborhood toy shop, and there was this kid, he must have not been more than 10 or 11 years old, who would come to buy something with his father. I think he wanted to buy a racket. And every time the shopkeeper gave him something, he's like, "Na, ye to made in China hai." But he said, made in India hai hi nahi mere paas. So as a concept, we may all agree that we don't want to buy those things. But what is the alternative? Are we creating enough options? So it's going to take time, I think.
Okay. Moving on, while we're speaking about borders, what's your take on Pakistan's current and future scenarios?
Pakistan is a perpetual nuisance, is how I put it. But right now they are in a bit of a spot because, see, their traditional support base has been the US. And while you see how Prime Minister Modi is going to be going on a state visit to the US this summer, and we are like a strategic partner, comprehensive strategic partner, whatever, everything's going great. We are working together on semiconductors, military, da-da-da-da-da. It wasn't always like that. For the longest time, the Americans kept India in play, but also kept India in check. And to keep India in check, they kept promoting the Pakistanis. It's a fact. We've all seen how when we were developing missiles in the 90s, the Americans imposed sanctions on us, on ISRO, on DRDO, on others. But the Pakistanis were doing whatever they were doing with the AQ Khan network, and they just, Bush Senior, and then for a brief while, Clinton also looked the other way. I think the turning point really was the Kargil misadventure from the Pakistani side. Until then, they were given a lot of leeway, and they were given a lot of money. Now what's happened is that money, the source of that money is drying up. And now they're depending on the Chinese for that money. But the Chinese money is very, very tricky to get. It is a debt trap. And they will not think twice before pulling the rug from under your feet. These Chinese power companies that operated in Pakistan, they did not get their bills. So Pakistan was plunged into darkness for the longest time. You must have seen about the nationwide power cuts. So those things happen. Then the Pakistani state invested a lot on the Taliban. Now the Taliban have a country to run. And the Taliban are showing them that they also have a mind of their own. They are behaving like the Taliban. And that poses a serious security challenge. I don't know if you followed the news, but in recent weeks, there have been cases of gunfire at the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan. They're fighting back. And they're saying, if you want us to curb terrorists on your soil, the Pakistani Taliban, you will have to pay for it. And you'll have to pay this much money. Where will they pay from? They can barely run their country. So the economy is on the brink of collapse. The source of money is drying up. Pakistan is also, for the longest time, depended on countries in West Asia with their whole Muslim Ummah brotherhood thing. But India, in the last few years, has really strengthened its relationship with Arab states. You look at UAE, you look at Oman, you look at Saudi Arabia. They are not going to, beyond a point, support Pakistan on Kashmir. The Turkish did. But look, I think what we did with the Turkish earthquake is a masterstroke. We sent aid. So we are neutralizing slowly all of the pockets of support that the Pakistani regime had. And now there's so much disturbance within. You know, Imran Khan, every day they say he's going to be arrested. He still remains a very popular leader. There's unrest in Balochistan. There's unrest in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. It's like the perfect storm that Pakistan is going through. And we don't want the state to collapse because we can't change the geography. We can't change who our neighbor is. And all of that tension will, to some level, spill over.
What's your geopolitical prediction?
Is it too complicated?
No, this is great. You can go even deeper.
No, this is fine, I think. But I thought I touched too many threads.
People love this kind of content.
Oh, great.
Yeah. Geopolitics is really kind of awaited by college students now and by teenagers, which is what's cool. When I was a teenager, it wasn't the case. Didn't know what's up. Yeah. Internet's made people smarter through information, and now it's the age of opinions. So anyway, go on. What's your geopolitical prediction? Because I feel it's one thing to talk about what's happening now, and there are very few people who can kind of, I don't want to say predict the future because it sounds gimmicky, but that's basically what I'm asking you to do about Pakistan. Like, where do you think it's going in this decade? And you're the right person to answer this because of how much you have to observe because of your job.
Yeah, so where is Pakistan going? I think it's going deeper into the China club. And that is the new challenge for the West because they don't want this to happen. At the same time, they don't want to give money to the Pakistani generals. So how do they control the beast without feeding it more? So the world wants to make sure that Pakistan does not become another North Korea. It also doesn't become another Afghanistan. But Pakistan in itself, I mean, I think the world is very late in realizing how much of a threat it poses. And there is no such thing as a good terrorist and a bad terrorist. For the longest time, the kind of money the Americans have pumped into Pakistan is insane. They've given them weapons. They've given them practically everything that they wanted. It's such a skewed policy. And now they're doing the same thing with Ukraine. You know, Ukraine is being supplied a lot of ammunition that is coming from Pakistan. Poland and the UK and Canada, they've signed deals. They're working with the Pakistanis. It's the mindset that because you don't share a border with Pakistan, it does not pose a threat to you, is so flawed because 9/11 happened to the US and it did not happen from a country that was bordering them. But I think policymakers are always looking at managing problems and not solving them.
You're basically saying it's been a volatile country ever since its inception. And therefore, going forward, as is the case with volatility, it's unpredictable what will happen, but it's likely that it will be a volatile situation.
It may break up, for all we know. The country may break up. There's just too much tension. And the fault lines are really beginning to show.
Do you have a prediction for roughly when?
No.
Okay.
I'm not into predictions.
You do believe that borders constantly change, as is the case with history, right? Like borders constantly change over the course of human history.
Yeah. But after the borders changed a lot, but I think in the last 100 odd years, with the concept of nation states emerging, we're not kingdoms anymore. We're not like countries operate in multilateral forums with rules that apply, and most in the 200 odd countries that we have in this world, barring a handful, most do follow those rules. So I think going forward, climate change will change more borders than geopolitics.
Okay. 1,000 years from now, if the human race still exists, they're going to look at our generation and our great grandparents' generation as roughly the same time.
Yeah.
Because it's 1,000 years in the future.
Yeah, but they'll watch our podcast and they'll know it's not the same.
Unless a comet hits Earth, which it might in the next 1,000 years, and internet wires get destroyed and data gets destroyed on memory cards. That's an actual possibility. If a comet hits.
Wow.
Yeah, and comets hit the Earth regularly. It's just not spoken about enough and cause a lot of damage. Look into the work of someone called Randall Carlson. Sorry, we're going astray.
No, it's
okay. But I still believe that during our lifetimes we are going to see some borders change.
Yes, we are seeing borders change.
Yeah.
This whole thing with Ukraine, it's happening. Yes, borders are changing.
Okay. In the same way that I asked you about China and Pakistan, I want to ask you about USA. Primarily because you have a lot of fans from there as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, one, what's your geopolitical commentary on it? And second, what do you think is the future? Third, what's your message to the fans?
Oh, let's start with the fans. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you. I'm always amazed that people want to hear what I have to say. So that's great. What will happen to the USA? The US is a fabulous country. If you've been there, you would. Great places to eat, lovely weather most of the times, very interesting people. There are obvious problems too. You're more likely to be killed by a teenager with a gun in the US today than in Afghanistan. That says a lot about what they're turning into. The fact that they have denied half of their population a basic right on their own bodies is unbelievable. I don't have a strong enough adjective to use here. But really, to say that women do not have the right to abort an unwanted baby is taking the country back to Stone Ages.
Where do you think the source of that thought has come from? Where do you think the source?
It's politics.
Okay.
This is whole Republicans, church, life, pro-life. But this is not pro-life. A woman is already a life form. And by forcing a baby on her, you are ruining one life and potentially the life of the child who is going to be an unwanted child into this world. And medical science is advanced enough to know at what point it's okay to abort. I have very strong views on this. And since we've been discussing content and all, I did a series of reports on abortion. They got no viewership. But I think it's a subject that must be touched upon. It's not okay for so many women to suffer. When childbirth is not a woman's doing alone, but in 9 times out of 10, she has to suffer the consequences of it. So for a society that calls itself forward-looking, developed, it's a huge blot on the US. The third issue is because everyone knows the positives anyway. What's going great. They're on top of their tech game. They're doing great. Their businesses. They've really aced the whole concept of taking the moral high ground, even when they have no feet to stand on. They just tell the world. They lecture the world what to do, how to do it. They have immense soft power. I mean, everyone talks about what NASA is doing. I'm not sure how many people can name the space agency of Japan or China or, if a child is picked up for a NASA course, it's in the newspapers in India. But if they're doing something with ISRO, they'll probably make it to the school board.
Or if Kim Kardashian is doing something.
Exactly. So that's soft power and due credit where they deserve it. So they have it and they have hard power. They have the military. They try to dictate the rules of how the world should be run. But they also have a very skewed understanding of what the sensibilities of this part of the world. They've not really figured it out. I think Americans also sometimes tend to, as they say, they use a sledgehammer to crack a nut. They shot down a $16 balloon with a $1 million missile. They're really not thinking sometimes. It's funny. So they have some obvious problems. I think that whole superpower status is slowly eroding because the world is beginning to see the double standards. I mean, how can you lecture other people on rights of minorities when blacks are suffering in your country? I think in the past, a lot of these things were not said. Now they are. And now the whole world is looking for an alternative narrative and for spaces where you can say these things and say them openly. I think the West has for a very long time tried to tell us how to be, what to eat, how to think, what to read. Maybe we're done with it.
But there's still a lot of people who'll agree with aspects of their version of social sciences.
Yes.
In India, sitting in India.
Absolutely.
And will still apply it to Indian problems, which are extremely unique to our country and our geography and our history.
And so, when they took over Iraq, and this is from a book that a journalist wrote, there was somebody who was a volunteer or some worker in the Republican Party in San Francisco. And he was asked to do something with the traffic department in Iraq, and he didn't know what to do because he had no experience. So he went to the website of the traffic rules for San Francisco and copied them for Iraq. It doesn't work. So what works in America may not work here. That is not to say that they don't have some great institutions and good concepts and great places to study. All I'm trying to say is that it's not right to think of everything Western or American as the gold standard.
My reading is, after meeting a ton of Americans, again, you can't generalize, but for the most part, at least the ones that travel are relatively friendly, but they're just unaware of what's happening in the rest of the world a little bit. And that's probably because of the media in that country. And also, I do believe that American problems do affect the rest of the world. Therefore, Americans are more focused on American problems and politics rather than what's happening in the world, which prevents them from having a bit of a worldview. When you talk to Europeans, it's a very different scenario. They're kind of aware. There is a very stark difference when you meet Europeans.
I think there's a clear trend that people in developed countries tend to look inwards and are not interested in what may be happening elsewhere. Whereas people in the developing world, like an average Indian is any day more aware of not just the local and national politics, but also international affairs compared to an average American.
Yeah. And I don't think that's going to change. You can't like shift culture.
Yeah.
Okay. That's it. That's the end of the podcast.
Wonderful.
How was it for you?
Very good.
Okay. I don't think I've done complete justice to this conversation, which is why I invite you back the next time you're in Bombay or whenever you think it's the right time to be back on the show. I feel like this was just one big ice-breaking session, honestly, and I hope that you had fun. That's all I'll say.
I did. Thank you so much, and I hope your audience likes what we discussed,
Okay.
and I hope your numbers and metrics show that this is a conversation worth repeating or having again. But we'll see how it goes.
In the middle of the episode, you asked me about whether or not I found my headline for this particular episode. The headline is your name, because people just want to hear what you have to say. That's what podcasts are. And before I let you go, I will ask you one last question. Maybe you can answer briefly or in a long form if you wish. You said that you believe more in trusting a combination of intuition and data rather than just being completely data driven. That's a very interesting thought. And I bring it up in the end because this question is honestly close to my heart and I forgot to ask you in the middle of the conversation.
No, that's okay.
But I believe in the same thing, that I feel like if you just allow data to dictate all your decisions, you'll end up with a little bit of a robotic result. which will lack some kind of nectar you need for getting the best possible results.
I agree. I think every year so many students go to MBA colleges. Good, bad, not so good, all over the world. And while the campuses may be substantially different, teachers, quality of teaching, etc., they're more or less studying the same case studies, the same economics, the same maths, right? Then why is it that some of them end up becoming great star CEOs and leaders of companies who change their industry, while most others are just doing a basic day job? Because those few took risks. The best example that I've read so far is that of Steve Jobs. Had he followed market analytics and what his team told him, there would never have been an iPod. There was no market demand for a gadget that stores songs and lets you listen to them. But he wanted it. He went with it. And it changed how we consume music for the whole world. So I'm not saying that you can base your decisions on only intuition. But what makes a leader stand out is how he processes the data and the trends and the feedback, and what of himself or herself he puts into that. That is where intuition, that is where gut feeling, that is where conviction, that is where the risk-taking appetite comes in. And we need that. If we don't have it, if we don't take risks, if we don't say, okay, while all of this does not add up, let's give it a shot, because we won't know what it will be if we don't. Then you're not making anything new.
Yeah. And this is what AI can never replace. This nuance.
Yeah.
So, Palki Sharma Upadhyay, thank you. Be back soon. Genuinely, really nice talking to you. And I'm going to ask you spicier and deeper questions the next time.
Okay. Sure.
No, but thank you. And I hope this episode was fun for you.
It was. Thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you. That was the episode for today. I've wanted to bring on journalists for a while, but the honest truth is that I felt I didn't know enough about the world in order to have a high-level conversation with journalists until now. The podcast has been kind enough to my mind in terms of making me meet some incredible people, getting to learn some incredible things, getting to learn along with you guys. That's what I love about my job. But I finally reached a point where I feel capable of speaking to a journalist and extracting the best possible content for you guys. I'd like to know from you guys in the comment section who else you'd like to see on the Ranveer Show. Please drop your comments. Tell us, especially from the world of journalism, whose opinions would you like to listen to and what topics would you like those journalists to speak about. We will listen to you folks about guest recommendations. There's another intensely good geopolitics podcast that's coming up pretty soon. Make sure you look out for that one. It's Sanjeev Sanyal. Oops! Did I say it? I think I said that. There's a lot of incredible guests that are coming up on the Ranveer Show. You are not ready for some of these people. All I'll say is download my meditation app, Level, from the App Store and the Play Store to get your mind ready to absorb some incredible knowledge, but also follow us on Spotify. Every episode of TRS is live on Spotify 48 hours before it's live on any other platform. We are just getting started, even though it's episode number 400. Maybe I don't understand mathematics, or maybe I'm just a serial optimist. Booyakasha. We'll see you soon, baby.